Welcome to Jewish Cinematheque, a monthly opportunity to meet with some of the important faces involved with films that tackle the Jewish experience. In each program, we will interface with writers, directors, and actors who have helped create important cinematic works, some here, some in Israel, and some from around the globe. Today we meet Avi Nesher, one of Israel's foremost directors of cinema, whose films include Turn Left at the End of the World, The Troop, Past Life, The Matchmaker, and the recently digitally restored 1984 classic, Rage and the Glory. Avi has not only produced all of his films, but was the writer or co-writer on most of them. Avi, welcome.
Pleasure.
So it's really a treat to have you here with us, in from Israel. Avi, most recently your film, Rage and the Glory, made over 30 years ago, was chosen by the Israeli Cinematheque to be restored. What happened with that film? Why did they choose this particular film, and is it a favorite of yours?
The Jerusalem Cinematheque, the Israeli Film Archive, have this extraordinary program to restore Israeli classics, as though to bring back to consciousness of the Israeli public films that they consider of great significance that maybe got lost throughout the years. And Rage and Glory always used to show up on all the lists of the 10 best Israeli movies ever made, but it came out during the War of Lebanon, which was very contentious.
1984, Lebanon was what, in 82?
82 to 90, so
right.
It came out in the heart of darkness,
Wow.
the darkest moment in Israeli history, and it was a very contentious film. It was a film that people on the left took it to be a right-wing film because Shamir, who was the Israeli prime minister at the time, was in the Stern Gang.
So let me just interrupt you for a second. The film was about what? Because
the film was about a cell in a Stern Gang, Lehi.
Okay, so for those of the audience who don't know what Lehi or the Stern Gang was?
Lehi is an outfit of freedom fighters, or terrorists, if you will, who fought the British Mandate during the mid-40s, claiming that the greatest obstacle is British refusal to let Jews come from Europe, and anyway, in a way, the British are in collusion with the Germans to exterminate European Jewry. So while Haganah and the Irgun, the other organizations who fought for the freedom of Israel, laid down their weapons to help the British fight the Germans, Lehi claimed that the British are actually responsible for all these Jewish lives.
Wow.
And they were a very, very violent little outfit. And the unique thing about them is that they were very extreme, but out of Lehi came the Israeli left and Israeli right. The people who established later on the Israeli Communist Party came from Lehi, and the people who are responsible for the extremist Israeli right came from Lehi. So when the movie was made, Yitzhak Shamir, the Israeli prime minister.
He was prime minister at the time.
He was prime minister, and he's mentioned in the film. So when the film came out, the Israeli left took it to be a film, glorifying, the Israeli fight against the British and Yitzhak Shamir. And the Israeli right took it to be a film which justifies the Palestinian struggle against Israel, because if our terrorists are called freedom fighters, then they are right in calling their freedom fighters, and and so on and so forth. So the film came out, and the controversy was extraordinary. And you can't even imagine nowadays a film being so controversial, because film is not perceived as important now as it was 34 years ago. And you could not find an Israeli newspaper at the time without an article denouncing this movie, glorifying this movie, loving this movie, hating this movie. And this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And now, with the restoration, I saw this film with a very young audience in the Jerusalem Jewish Film Festival a few weeks ago, and they loved it. They just loved it as cinema. Lebanon war being, long ended, and now what remains is cinema, and this sort of trying to understand exactly what is a freedom fighter as opposed to what is a terrorist.
So this controversial period in Israeli history, Film comes out. You're a 20-something young filmmaker being bombarded from all sides. And the film sort of finds its place and then quietly is off stage, and now, boom. It's interesting that the Israeli Film Archive and the Cinematheque chose this, and the reaction from young people is...
It's extraordinary.
This is a part of our history. This is something we didn't know about.
Yes, it's exactly like that. And you know, I mean, before that, I made two films, The Troop and Dizengoff '99, that were really, really successful. They're considered Israeli classics. Most Israelis have seen these movies numerous times, but they were lighthearted movies. I mean, subversive in their own way.
Yeah, I mean, the Troop really, each of those films dealt with young people, but the Troop really challenged conventions of the army. I mean, it was in itself, it pushed some buttons, but you feel no problem being accepted by the Israeli audience.
No, it was done very slyly, so to speak. A very good Israeli film critic, Yair Raveh, actually called Rage and Glory the negative of The Troop. You know, in many ways, it's very similar because it speaks of group dynamics, which are the key, of course, to understand Israeli society. In Israeli society, the we comes before the I. It's very different from the American pursuit of happiness. I mean, in Israel, it's the pursuit of the collective goal. Very much to this day, even though the kibbutz days are long gone. So, Halahaka, you know, is just like the Troop is just like Rage and Glory, only sunnier. You know, it's funny and it has songs and it's just as subversive. And Rage and Glory, you know, deals with a group of freedom fighters / terrorists, but it is much darker. So The Troop and Dizengoff '99, very successful to this day. These are movies which are shown on every Independence Day. You know, I mean, every Israeli of every generation knows this movie by heart. And Rage and Glory, because it was so controversial, was kind of left behind, even though it would show up on critics' 10 best movies of all time.
Where can we find this? We can't find it on Netflix.
Well, the miracle is that the Samuel Goldman Company, same company that distributed Past Life in America, has just picked up all rights for Rage and Glory, and wonderfully enough...
So a major film company in the United States is taking a 1984 Israeli film for re-release?
Yes.
Wow.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful, and just shows you, the power of cinema, how cinema can transcend time, and how it can become part of again, the collective thinking. So the wonderful Samuel Goldwyn Company people, chose to acquire this movie, and now, they're about to show it universities and festivals and all kind of places. And it's an interesting movie. It's quite an experience.
Soon to be at your local motion picture theater house.
Wow. Yes.
We listened to you. You have no accent. You were born in Israel. You grew up in New York. Your father was a shaliach. He worked for the United Jewish Appeal. You grew up in New York City, graduated from Ramaz High School, and then went on to Columbia. And where did this career, this diversion into filmmaking happen? What point in your life?
Well, I mean, I always loved film. As a young boy growing up in Ramat Gan in Israel, I mean, I would go to every matinee I could, even before I understood that there is a filmmaker making these movies. I just liked cinema as an alternative reality. And when I grew up in New York City, there was a wonderful theater on 8th Avenue and 18th Street called the Elgin. And they would do double bills of classics. So you would see, all the Buster Keaton movies, all the Ingmar Bergman movies, all the Fellini movies. And I went to Ramaz, but let's just put it this way: I didn't spend all of my days in Ramaz. I found more than one occasion skipping school.
Well, you were doing homework outside of school.
I was doing homework, and I think I was on the basketball team, so my behavior was tolerable. And I would go there, and I would spend all day long watching the same Buster Keaton movie, maybe 5, 6 times, and just being bewitched by the sheer artistry of visual filmmaking and the subtlety and the sophistication and things. I mean, I came from literature. I mean, I used to write short stories and this and that, but cinema is just such a rich art, and it encompassed everything I loved, music and plastic arts and narrative and literature. And it was a combination of everything I love. And when I went to Columbia, there was an amazing film teacher, one of the greatest film critics who ever wrote about cinema, Andrew Saris. He's the father of the American auteur theory.
Fantastic.
And he wrote a book, The American Cinema, which to this day I know by heart. And he had huge influence on me, both as a critic and as a filmmaker. And actually, there was no film program at Columbia when I went there, and he just let me take a bunch of film classes, even though they were meant mostly for the master's program. And an interesting thing, maybe 8, 9 years ago, I made a movie called The Secrets, and he wrote a glowing review about The Secrets.
That was shortly before he passed away.
Yes, and for me, it was like the most exciting review.
It had come full circle.
Yes, and I think he had no idea who I was, because, I mean, he taught in this big class in the Macmillan Hall, 400 students. He was like a god, for Columbia students. I mean, and he didn't know he was writing about a former student. But for me, getting this rave review from my mentor, from this great
Andrew
teacher,
Saris, the great critic of the Village Voice.
yes, an amazing influence on all American cinema of the 70s, the greatest era of American cinema.
Coming out of Columbia, then you went into the Israeli army. You actually served in the same commando group with Yonatan Netanyahu at one point. And then you began, recently I found some of your early criticism. You were, sort of in this direction of becoming a film critic.
Right.
And boom, in 1924, and when you turned 24, you came out with your first film, The Troop.
Right.
Was it your army experience that helped develop that story?
In many ways it was, because there I was, a kid from New York City, an Israeli kid from New York City, mind you, but still from New York City, in a unit with a bunch of kibbutzniks, playing a whole different game than I ever knew. And I was a nerd, I mean, I was an athlete, but I was from New York City, and these guys were roughneck kibbutzniks. And it was, the roughest, toughest unit in the Israeli army. I mean, I was there for a year. I was wounded, but it was the most significant year of my life. And I learned more about cinema in that unit than I learned from film school, because, again, it's all about the we. And cinema is the art of the we. I mean, you have a vision, but you must share it with a lot of people, because you cannot make a film by yourself. So you have to become very collaborative. And I was very, very intrigued by the unique interpretation of the we that Israeli society offers. And the Israeli we has a lot of contention within it, but when there's an outside danger, this contention turns to unity. And I was truly fascinated by how Israeli society works in a really unique manner. And when I came out of the army and I went back to Columbia, I wanted to write about my army experience within the group dynamics of that we in the army. And I wrote about 40, 50 pages, and I found them to be dull, because there are a lot of basic training movies, I mean, be it Stanley Kubrick, Full Metal Jacket or whatever, and we were different, but not that different. And I remembered when I was trying to get into that unit, Ehud Barak, who the former Israeli prime minister, then called Brugge, he was the commander of the unit. And maybe 20,000 kids tried to get in, and they would take in only 20. So a minor percentage of people would get in, and I made it to the top 40. And then he interviewed each one of us, and he asked me, where would you go if we don't accept you? And being, a well-brought-up, kid from New York City, I said, he was telling me gently that I was on the outs. And I said, oh, I'm going to go to one of those army entertainment troops because I play guitar. And he said, what, are you crazy? Don't you want the Air Force, the Naval Commandos? I said, no. I'm very non-militaristic by nature. And if you don't want me, I'll just go play guitar someplace. and so I always thought that, those Israeli entertainment troops, I mean, they were just as elitist in Israel of the 70s as the special forces.
Famously, they rejected Ofra Chaza.
That's right. I mean, all of the great Israeli stars came from these army entertainment troops. So if you got into one of them, your road to success was pretty established. Just politically, I mean, if you look at the Israeli prime minister in the last 25 years, almost all of them came from that unit. Whether it's Bibi Netanyahu, Ehud Barak, the Israeli parliament has at least 10 or 12 people who served there. 10% of the parliament came from this tiny unit. So, it's not unlike the old Ivy League in America, where you had to go through Harvard or Columbia or Princeton to get someplace. And I was really fascinated by this elitist group dynamic thing. And I decided to write the same screenplay, but not about special forces, but about in Army Entertainment,
Army Variety
which
Group.
has
Wow.
music and has some girls and is lighter in tone. And I decided to do it in a way that would both show my adoration of it and my critique of it. And the screenplay, you know, written by a very young man, was very, very controversial because it wasn't just about the good. It was about the good and the bad. And I remember when the movie was done, the producer said, nobody will ever see this movie because it doesn't play by the rules, right? It doesn't have the great love story. It doesn't have, you know, about the Sephardi and Ashkenazi Jews. I mean, it's just very Israeli, full of wisecracks, and it's about the group. And the day the movie opened, you couldn't find tickets in any of the theaters.
Wow.
I mean, it didn't build. It started out as a big hit from the get-go. And again, it's the wisdom of the audience. I'm a great believer in the wisdom of the audience. People know what they want to see. And people embraced this movie from day one. It was really a phenomenon.
And even today, I mean, it's known in Israel that your films attract very large audiences. They really, Israelis seem to want to see an Avi Nesher film. Interestingly, just to stay with that for one more moment, the film ends with a choice that you made back then of the Song for Peace, Shir LaShalom. Why then? What statement were you making? And how has that changed now that that song has taken all kinds of other historical overtones?
Well, you know, it's interesting. When we were making The Troop, an Israeli general, Rehavam Gandhi, tried to stop the making of the movie because it ended with the Song of Peace. So ending a movie with a Song of Peace at that time was seen as very subversive because basically it sounded detrimental to the morale of our forces, right? Which is, of course, bullshit. And he really tried to subvert the process. And the movie came out the year Sadat came to Israel. So, I mean, I'm not suggesting that the movie, you know,
had anything to do with Sadat.
or
But
Sadat,
the timing was good.
Or Sadat saw the movie and said, I have an idea, you know, let me come to. You know, I mean, you know, films feed off the vibe of society, and society feeds off the vibe of cinema. And I'm a great believer in cinema being a popular art form, being very, very effective politically, especially, you know, if it doesn't, you know, brandish a flag of a sort, because otherwise you're just preaching to the choir. You know, if you make a movie that relates to a wide audience, you know, and you put in it what you want to say in a very entertaining, in a very engaging manner, the movie will have, you know, just like the great Altman movies in the 70s, like, I mean, to my mind, MASH, you know, had more impact on the Vietnam War than many marches against the war. So
even though it's set in an entirely different war.
In Korea, right. So that's been my philosophy as a filmmaker, you know, for many years. And you make movies that have, you know, that try to change things politically, but do it in a very entertaining, very engaging manner, so a large part of the public would see it. People who do not necessarily share your own political views, but, you know, my theory is come to see my movie. You will have an interesting time, entertaining time for 2 hours. And if you want to share my views, you may. And if you don't have to. I will not force it on you. And I think that's the reason why these movies have been so successful.
Or they may reinterpret your views to their views.
That's perfectly fine with me. My theory is once I finish a movie, it's no longer mine. You know, it belongs to the greater collective. And here I go back to the word, you know, to the ultimate Israeli word, the collective.
So you were very successful as a 20-something, making film after film. You attracted the attention of Dino De Laurentiis.
Right.
He said, you know, Avi, why don't you come to Hollywood? You're hot, you're good. And you spent the next many years in Hollywood, over a decade. And then all of a sudden, you decided what? To go back to Israel. I mean, can you just talk about that experience?
Yeah.
And that choice?
Well, frankly, I wanted my kids to grow up in Israel. It was very, very important to me because, like most Israelis of my generations, I'm the son of immigrants. You know, you call them Olim Chadashim, but ultimately they're immigrants, and Israel is an immigrant nation, much like America, much like Australia. And I really wanted my children to be Israelis to Israeli parents and to make their choices later on in life. So when my daughter was born, I told my agent and my lawyer and my associate that, I will make movies for 5 more years and I'll go back to Israel. And at that time, I had my own production company. We made movies with HBO. We made movies with Buena Vista International that owned Disney and Fox, and a very, very successful company. And nobody took me seriously. Nobody thought that you would put your family ahead of your career. That's very un-American to do, right? But I was dead serious. I really wanted my children to grow up Israeli. And when my daughter approached the age of elementary school, I told my associate, that is it. I have to go.
5 years are up.
5 years are up. I have to go back to Israel. And I pretty much thought my filmmaking career would be over. My father passed away at that time, and my father was the ultimate immigrant. My father was born in the small town in Romania that was sometimes Romanian, sometimes German, sometimes Russian, came to Israel, passed away in New York. This man shared 5 nationalities in his life. And I really wanted to make a movie, perhaps one final movie, about the Israeli immigrant experience, which for my father was very, very painful. My father often said jokingly that, they brought him to Israel so his son would make the troop. Right? That basically that his generation was not of much use except of creating
right.
The people who will fight for the next 70 or so years. And I wanted to make a movie commemorating his memory. And and true to my fashion, my father was a very funny man. I didn't think
Father was a survivor of the
Holocaust.
Of the Shoah.
He wasn't in camps. But he was in labor camps, I think, in Romania. But my mother's family, Nazis killed our family. I mean, I am a son of Holocaust surviving parents. So I made a movie, about the immigrant experience, in the South. And I thought I'm making a small movie, called Turn Left at the End of the World. And I thought
Sofa Olam Smola.
Sofa Olam Smola.
Wow.
And I thought that would be it. That would be like my last movie, paying my respect to my father. And the movie became the biggest success in the history of Israeli cinema. God knows how, And but it was a pleasant surprise. And of course, the last 2 decades have been extraordinary in Israeli cinema.
It's crazy what you've been able to accomplish. So you made that film in 2004?
Right.
It's a story about Indian immigrants coming together with Moroccan immigrants and their relationship with each other.
Yes.
Powerful film, incredible box office. Everyone seemed to have seen the film. Let's just take a moment and stop and look at a clip.
Sure.
Moroccans to play with us? Never.
Si on est tous juifs, alors on n'aime pas les juifs qui n'ont pas la même couleur. C'est pas très intelligent.
Partout autour de nous, il y a la guerre, les soucis, les problèmes. La seule chose qui éclaire la nuit, c'est l'amour.
Ça va français, français.
British.
Français, c'est le meilleur au monde.
British.
Oh mon Dieu.
That was absolutely amazing. I just love that film. It speaks to the great experiment that maybe was not all that successful, had its problems. And here you are, laying it out for the Israeli public and say, where have we gone, where have we been, and where are we now? It's just wonderful. And that was followed up by
a film called The Secrets, dealing with the issue which I think is the greatest issue facing Israeli society nowadays, the place of religion within Israeli political life. It was a staunchly feminist movie. It dealt
really? I mean, you just really dealt just with women.
Because I think that is the issue. I mean, the greatest problem, so to speak, with the Jewish Orthodox world, the Haredi world, is that they see women in a totally different way that they're seen by a Western democracy. And Israel aspires to be a Western democracy, and that's where the chasm lies. If you force women to sit in the back of the bus, that brings us memories from the American South. If you forbid women to sing in front of a male audience, you shut them up. If you forbid women from intermingling with men, the list goes on and on and on, And again, and Israel was established as a modern Western democracy, for Jews and, and all citizens and Arabs and such. And for people such as myself who are proud Jews and respect Judaism, women are equals.
What was the reaction in terms of the feminist community? Can a male director actually bring about and deal with these kinds of subjects?
Yes, I mean the interesting reaction to the movie is I would notice, I mean, because you get the box office results from each theater from the theater, and I would see that in the early show, the 11 o'clock show in the morning, you would have an extraordinary amount of people coming to see this movie, and I couldn't imagine who gets up in the morning and he goes to see this movie.
Right.
So I decided to check for myself, and I went to one of those theaters at 11 in the morning, and it was full of religious women, of Orthodox women who came to see the movie on the sly without their husband's permission, to experience this movie. And for me, this was, the political power that a movie can have. That people who are not allowed to see it. And as you know, for the last 15 years, there's been a big struggle and a big turnabout in the role of religious women within Israeli society. And
that must have been very liberating for them. Wow.
Yes, it really has.
Your last film, Past Life, you dedicated to your dad.
Yes.
Can you just talk about that? What was so special about that film that you felt that connection with your father?
It's a film about Holocaust survivors and their children. And of course, I cannot make a movie about the Holocaust because I was not there. And no imagination is great enough or dark enough to really imagine what it was like. But to be the son of a Holocaust survivor is a very unique experience. Even to be the children of the son of a Holocaust survivor is a unique experience. And trauma, apparently is passed on. I'm not sure it's passed on genetically, but it's certainly passed on culturally. And it was important for me to make a movie about the trauma called the Holocaust because, when people judge Israel, people do not understand how much a part does the Holocaust still play in our psyche. I mean, we come across as very powerful and very confident, very macho nation. We are a terrified nation. I mean, we are a country under existential threat. We take the Iranians very, very seriously. So the Holocaust is very much part of the Israeli experience. Some politicians abuse this thing, I mean, we can be easily scared into anything just by the mention of the Holocaust. So it was important for me to take a true story that takes place within the life of two sisters, one a great musician, one a scandalous reporter, whose parents are Holocaust survivors, and something comes up that threatens the whole unity of this family. It tugs at the very substance that makes this family stick together.
It's almost a mystery story within a very powerful drama.
With music.
With great music.
Yes.
Past Life is available. Actually, you can watch it on Amazon Prime.
Yes.
And we look forward to seeing Rage in the Glory on the screens here in the United States. Avi Nesher, what a pleasure it was to have you with us today. And I wish you much success. Your next film, The Other Story
yes.
is coming out probably over in the late summer.
In the fall.
In the fall.
In the fall.
Well, just keep making incredible movies. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. This was lovely. Thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.